Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Welcome to the Roundtable Discord server Roundtable podcast. I'm going to be interviewing my good friend BlackFeathers today, and we're going to be talking about doomsday prepping and survivalism. And in particular, we're going to be talking about some of the misconceptions that people have about doomsday prepping and survivalism, and how it's not what people think about just stockpiling canned food, but it's more about a mentality of ingenuity and responsiveness and resourcefulness. But before we get started on that, make sure you've joined the Roundtable Discord server. Make sure you have checked out #RT Podcast and checked out our over 200 Roundtable podcasts on YouTube and BitChute. Join, subscribe, follow, etc. That being said, welcome, BlackFeathers. How are you, my friend?
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to do podcast. I've got very interesting things to talk about, and this time will be a little more organized as I've learned the whole podcast format. I hope rain doesn't strike harder because I have a metal roof and then it's going to start making noise, but hopefully it won't be a problem.
100%. So I'm looking forward to getting into this. So I was a doomsday prepper, a survivalist, stockpiling food and water, weapons and medicine, ammunition and antibiotics. But you are saying that really this isn't what survivalism is. It's more about a mentality or a mindset. So why don't you walk us through an introduction to survivalism?
Yes. The first thing that people think about when they talk about prepping is hoarding, or having a bunker and preparing for doomsday or a zombie apocalypse. Of course, these are some rather extreme examples. You can see a lot of reasonable and more grounded preppers, and they talk a lot about hoarding. They talk a lot about supply, self-defense, about bug out, about whatever else. But when it comes to the core of the practice in all of its facets, it's all really about being proactive. I roamed the prepping community, but no one really talked about. No one really talks much about it. That's pretty much the meta about prepping. So when it comes down to it, what you got to think, why are you stockpiling food for? Why are you trying to maintain a supply of water? Why are you maybe working on self-defense through martial arts or guns or any other means? What are you exactly are preparing for? Some people make EDC kits, some people make bug out kits. Bugging out is basically when you exit your location to another, or basically you leave your area. It can be tactic, although you have to really consider and plan it out very well. And in most of the scenarios, it's not really something sensible to do. You have to really evaluate the situation that you have at hand. So about the EDC kit, the bug out kit, a lot of people end up stuffing in bags and their whatever they carry around with a lot of necessary stuff. I do have an EDC kit, and I'd say it reduced in volume like at least 60% because I was carrying a lot of shit I wasn't using at all. So prepping is being proactive, evaluating your needs and challenges that you may face in the future. Everyone will have a different challenge depending on where they live. For example, if you are in a rural area and you are already quite sustainable, you kind of live a little bit off the grid, you can produce your own food, you have a well, why would you stockpile food and water? That does not make any sense. You are already sustainable, and that's even better than stockpiling food. It's the only thing is being able to provide for yourself instead of having a supply. A supply is really it's a little more situational, really. For example, if something occurs like in Metropolis, where in some metropolis when there are riots and the place goes into a state of anarchy, you can't quite leave your house because it's dangerous. You could see with well, I'm not going to cite the events. I'm not going to draw any political stuff to this theme, but you get the idea. Cities may become quite dangerous sometimes because of such and such problems, and maybe you don't really, well, you really shouldn't join that violence if you value your life. To stay home for God knows how long, 1 day, 2 days, a week. Maybe there can be some grid failures depending on your area. For example, I live in an area where there's a lot of incident. That basically it's the biggest incident of thunderstorms in the whole country. So energy isn't really available sometimes. So I have to prepare for that. I have to deal would be having a generator, but it's a little overkill as the power outages doesn't last more than 2 days in extreme scenarios. Evaluating my I don't really need to stockpile food or water as much, so I'm good with that. So let me get back on track. Yeah, prepping is a mindset. The core value is proactiveness, but there are two other, not just two, there are more, but the core values of prepping is, first off, before proactiveness even, is vigilance. You have to be alert to what's going on in your area, what's going on in the world, so you can foresee the changes that may come and adapt to it. What happened before the whole COVID lockdown, people were listening to the news and they, oh, okay, that's new virus. That's something to worry about, right? But yet they did nothing. When COVID finally showed to be a problem and to be spreading everywhere, people started to panic. And what happened to the markets, to the supermarkets? Everyone was at the same time going to the supermarkets hoarding toilet paper. Some places even ended up having no food on the shelves, like in New York City. And you could ask me, is that prepping? No, that's not prepping. They did not look up to the incoming problem. They were not vigilant, and they did not prepare accordingly. And they destroyed the supply and made it worse for everyone. And here comes the next value, proactiveness. While being vigilant and evaluating the potential problems that you may face, and being tuned to the news, knowing what's happening, what's going on, you must be proactive. You must take action before a problem arises. Here's some definitions from the Cambridge Dictionary on proactive, about proactive. Taking action by causing change and not only reacting to change when it happens. That's the exact opposite of what people done. Intended to produce a good result or avoid a problem rather than waiting until there is problem. So all this talk about hoarding, about stockpiling, it may really not be the most efficient thing for you. You have to see what exactly do you need according to your own need. If you live in a very cold area where there are very harsh winters, you have to prepare according to what you may face. May there be a water shortage, may there be an energy shortage, maybe there's can be a problem with food supply. Then okay, start stockpiling food for there's a storm, before there's the season of storm or whatever else may happen. I never lived in a really cold place, so can't give the best example, but heat also is a problem. If you run out of energy or heat, you run out of fuel, or maybe wood for a fireplace or energy for a heat source, there may be a serious problem that you may face. Or if you live in a metropolitan area, there's a whole other set of challenges that you have to consider. But if anything fails, you shouldn't panic. You should. No, it's a little complicated to say what you should do, but when it comes down to it, you have to be able to improvise whenever everything else fails. You have to have the tools necessary to be able to overcome these challenges and the skills. Being proactive fails and you fail to detect the challenge, you must improvise according to the situation, take an action. There's a thing called the bystander effect, when there's an event unfolding and people start watching as if they were an audience. It's like they feel that what's taking place is none of their business and it doesn't affect them. That may not always be the case, and that kind of thing tends to lead to disaster, and it's just kind of a herd mentality. You have to break from that kind of mindset and try to take action to protect not only yourself but the others around you. Being proactive is also, for example, we talk a lot about on prepping. They talk a lot about firearms, about martial. Remember, that's a last resort defense. Again, definition of proactiveness. Where is it? Taking action by causing change and not only reacting change when it happens, or intended to produce results, or produce a good result or avoid a problem rather than waiting until. So in conflict, avoid it or design, it's not only better, you're going to avoid a lot of consequences that comes with violence and with action. So instead of being confrontational, try to be the gray man. The concept of gray man is being one with the crowd. It's basically blending in and not being a target, using the environment to your advantage. Part of being a gray man, the concept of gray man, is also not talking to people about your preps and saying, hey everyone, I got a big stash of supplies in my house should any calamity happen, because this thing will tell you is, oh, then if there's a problem, I'll go to your home, or I'll you'll help me out, right? Yeah, people will not think, oh, that's a good idea, maybe I should. They will think about going for you to help. That's probably what's going to happen, and you probably won't be able to help everyone. People will, depending on how desperate they are, they may do some not very nice things. So be mindful of that. There's a site called ready.gov, which is a government site that give a lot of very helpful tips for for everyone about pretty much everything on food supply, water supply, what to do in case of well, and they sort of a lot of scenarios. They even give economic tips on how to manage your money and how to reserve for, well, if anything happens, you may have a reserve to help you out. So the next, let's see, what's the next topic? Right. Applications of prepping today in the day-to-day life. I talked about evaluating our own needs and challenges, of course, every different context. One of your most valuable things is not all the supply that you gather. It's an asset that nobody can take you, and will add great value to you instead of what you own that can be taken away. It's a skill. Skills cannot be taken away from you unless someone takes your life. For example, what's worth having a full fitted med kit with everything that you could possibly need when you have absolutely no medical training? That's, well, you can use it. Oh, Jesus. It's funny because the entire week, the weather was perfect. My connection was terrific. And then Monday, podcast day, there's a thunderstorm. There's the huge rain with crazy winds like I've never seen. And connection starts to fail.
So would you be able to, seeing that we've got a good connection right now, would you be able to go over that last point that you were making, the third one? Because that was basically, there was nothing there. There was no feed coming through.
Oh, okay. I talked about, I said there are 3 core things to 3 core concepts to prepping, which is vigilance, proactiveness, and the last thing, which I forgot to talk about, I ended up skipping it, was it's quite basic. It's just a quick mention. It's mental and physical fortitude. You have to have a stoic mind. You have to be able to face the problems and whatever comes at you, and not flinch, not give in to fear and anxiety, because when you're facing a challenge, let all that overcome you. You're not clearly you're not going to be able to act and to improvise over that situation and remember all your plans. And also physical fortitude, you have to keep your body in shape, like do a minimal so that you can stay healthy, and well, whatever happens, you are able to deal with it, have the disposition, the energy to put in whatever needs to be done.
How do you think a person can build up that mental fortitude?
Yes, it's quite complicated. There are some philosophies that work a lot on it, about that. One of them would be Stoicism. If you study Stoicism and on what it's about, which is the philosophy of being mentally invincible, of not letting anything take you down. Buddhism also works on some concepts that help with that. Buddhism and Stoicism have quite a lot in common. I haven't heard many people talk about that. I want to study both together and maybe write something about it, make a podcast about it.
So basically, you were saying that a person really needs to prepare themselves for the potential of a disaster or something where they would need to have skills in place that they've developed prior to, whether it be mental strength or physical strength.
That is that's good. It's a good tactic, but proactiveness is the number one thing. It's and also evaluating what may realistically happen and what you may realistically face. Not only disaster wise, like not everyone lives in an area where there are hurricanes, like where I live. There's not going to be hurricane here unless something really wild happens to the climate. At that point, the whole world would be in distress. So why should I prepare for a hurricane? It doesn't make any sense. I should evaluate what problems may I actually face and adapt to it and be proactive. It doesn't proactiveness is not worth anything if you're realistic.
So learning basic medical skills, like past beyond.
Yeah, some things are universal, such as medical skills. Maybe sustainability is also favored over hoarding. If you can provide your own, if you can grow your own food, if you can obtain resources, it's much better than having a limited stockpile that will eventually run out. So such skills are optimal. Of course, it's much more difficult if you live in a city. So again, proactiveness. Think of how you can overcome that problem. How can you circumvent it?
You mentioned magic skills. Like what? How would that help you?
No, I never talked about that. Well, if magic is real, which I never seen any evidence of, a lot of people will say that I'm wrong, especially in the server. Yeah, okay, go for it. But sure, that's it.
What
That
about
can help you
survival
in any
skills,
way.
like in outdoor survival skills? Do you think that would be helpful in a city environment?
Not at all, unless I don't know, maybe in a very unlikely scenario that you're traveling to meet a friend and you end up to fall into um, a rainforest. That probably not going to happen, especially if you don't travel via plane over areas that has rainforests. No, that's not worth at all. You're being proactive towards a problem that won't exist. Okay, that technically that's being proactive, but it's not very efficient.
Not if you live in a city. So what would be a good like a good course?
Well, for the
Say?
city,
Yeah.
For the city, you should, well, not city, anywhere with, if you're any close to human civilization, dealing with people, understand people, and psychology, sociology, things like that. Probably think about, study. Nothing that common sense won't be able to help, but you can't quite teach common sense. Comes down to experience.
What kinds of skills would be good to learn for a city environment, aside from how to interact with others and the basic like medical skills?
Knowing how to get around your city, knowing the local institutions, the important places, how to get in and out of that place, having somewhere else to go. I'd say that's quite important. if should anything there's a state of unrest and there's something about to go down, maybe better if you leave the place entirely before anything bad happens, being able to defend yourself, but above that, being able to avoid conflict altogether. Street smarts too, which is something that it all comes down to awareness. Being aware of your surroundings, who's around, who's approaching you, trying to read their intentions, and staying away from shady stuff and bad neighborhoods. Well, it's all about proactiveness. Proactiveness, again, evaluate your needs, evaluate your situation, be realistic, conscious of everything. Each case, it's its own case, context.
Recently I've
These
been
are
noticing the public locations where, I don't know why, but they're water spouts. Like sometimes there'd be an access port on the side of a building where if you open that.
Oh yeah, we have that here in very few places. It's not that common, but that's something that I keep in mind. Basically, it's clean water for free. We have some water springs in this area. Pure water literally leak out of the mountains and some places around here. So as I said, water here is not a problem at all. So water perhaps may not be really necessary unless there's a real unless there's a real big calamity and the place becomes a complete anarchy and there are factions controlling these water spots, then yeah, sure, that will be a problem, but it's very unlikely.
So aside from knowing where you would be able to access water, what other types of resources do you think that a person should scout out before any negative thing happens?
Well, you should probably have that anyway before anything happens. But as I said, sustainability is the go-to. Instead of hoarding water and somebody having a capitation system or a filter and a small supply just to get you by until you can start collecting water, of course, that will be more optimal. Food is a little more complicated. If you can have food enough to get you by until you can figure something out, and maybe if there's something really bad happen, you could hoard some other stuff that may be valuable trade wise, where you can trade for other people with other people for food if should money not be something that work out anymore.
So speaking about people,
But as I said, the context, it's the world is really big, and I can't quite go over every scenario.
what do you think about getting to know your neighbors or building a community of people you can rely on in times of need, in times of emergency? Like you were saying, you'd be able to trade an item for something. Would you work on that ahead of time?
That is one of the most essential things. Some people that go into prepping, mainly those people that get into all that tactical things, they like to think about the lone wolf, that they think they're going to be John Wick and do everything alone and survive out alone. That's you're probably gonna, depending on the situation, if really bad things happen, you're probably gonna get killed or die out in many ways very fast. Humanity didn't get here at the point. Well, granted, we're not in a very good shape really, but we made a lot of advancements, not by being alone, but being in a community, we only survive because we became social animals that are capable of passing knowledge along, and thus building intelligence and sharing that information, sharing resources with each other, and helping each other out. So yeah, building communities before that can be probably the most valuable thing. Getting to know your neighbors, your keeping your family together, having a whole plan. For example, if something happens, the family may have a place where everyone should reunite. Some preppers, I've seen some Christian prepper communities, so religion unites them. I'm not going to go over my personal beliefs, but still, that's quite good because you're building a solid community. You're going to have someone to help you out with things, and as a group, you're going to be much more stronger. And again, there are many different contexts, many different ways which you can do that. I don't really have a specific way of developing that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was just wondering what types of skills a person could seek out from members in their community. Like, let's say a person is good at doing, I don't know, growing crops or gardening or whatever. I guess you'd probably want to exchange information with each other, right? So that you can now say, okay, if in my time of need, needing a vegetable, let's say, I can offer you this skill of if you ever need any medical assistance, I have first aid treatment or training.
Yeah, cultivating proactiveness among people and divulging this knowledge, talking about minimal things that you should do in ready.org, that site that I talked about. They have some recommendations there for every citizen. They say every citizen should have at least, I don't recall, I think 2 days supply of food for each person. It's a very small amount, but it's at least it's something. It's definitely much better than having nothing at all. It's gonna get you by whatever thing may happen before things stabilize. And under rationing, those 2 days of food may become 4 or even more. That's an example of miners in Chile, who became trapped for 2 months and a few days. They got into a vault that had very little supply. I think it was 2 days supply for 25 men, and they were 30 or something. They made that last until they could be rescued. So those 2 days can save you should anything really bad happen.
What caused you to decide for yourself that you wanted to become a prepper or get into that type of world or that type of thought process? Why did you decide to do that for yourself?
Well, it's a good question. I don't quite know. It's all about survival. It's kind of something basic. Having these supplies, these knowledges. This political scenario where I live has been kind of unstable. There was some unrest sometimes. Again, as I said, there are frequent power outages during thunderstorms. Sometimes the water infrastructure also is not terribly good. Sometimes they mess up. I'd say mostly out of incompetence. So I always keep a spare. What's the name? Gallon, not gallon like the imperial measure imperial system of measurement, gallon, like the big bottle for storing things, water. Yeah, metric system is the best. Please stop using the imperial system, for God's sake. Anyway, among a few other.
So do you think figuring out a way, like in extreme situations, do you think figuring out a way to get food is something that would be necessary? In other words, maybe learning how to make traps for whatever animals you may have around, or I don't know, coming up with some sort of
If really
system.
big disasters happen, what happens is people start going to the countryside because it's where food is being made, and it's where job demands are. It's where the most jobs are being offered because people are famine is all around, and that's where the food is being made. So they need people to work there. When disaster happens, water, no, not water, food is the most valuable thing. When you realize that you cannot eat money, well, guess who's going to have all the control? It's people who has food, who can produce food. So, as I said, a limited supply of food is really not optimal for those scenarios. You should know how to make your food. Unfortunately, that's not accessible for everyone. As I said, if you live in the middle of a metropolis, how the hell are you going to grow food? That's why one of the strategies for a city place is having someone or a place where you can do that, somewhere else where you can go to. It's safer, and that you can grow these supplies or have supplies that are being kept safe,
So
because
if,
that's where there will be the most demand for food, where food cannot be grown.
and let's say you get to the point where you are now finding yourself needing to leave the city because of whatever the situation is. Do you personally have a plan in place on how to transport yourself to outside of the city? Like, have you put a plan in place on how to actually get yourself from point A to point B? Because, most people are going to be trying to do the same thing, and they're going to be in their cars, or they're going to be taking public transportation. Do you have a plan on
Because
doing
they
that?
are not proactive, and because they are not vigilant. If you are vigilant, of course, yeah, some disasters unfortunately cannot be quite predicted, but some can. So if you are vigilant and can manage to do that before everyone else does, that's going to be great. But if you cannot, that's a whole other problem within itself. I could not really answer that question. As I said, improvise. Not everyone has a helicopter on their garage, so
Exactly.
almost no one has that. So I don't know. There'll be huge traffic jams. Can you really go out on foot? That may not be practical depending on where you live, or on the bike. I have no idea. But your best bet would be really vigilance, and trying to do that before other people start filling up the roads.
So you mentioned the bug out bag, right? Basically, a
Yes.
bag that allows you to have quick access to the basic necessities you may need in a situation where you have to get yourself to safety, let's say, right? From where you are. What kinds of things would you include in that?
Nothing that isn't already in my EDC. I'd say it's mostly that tactical snake oil thing that people do. But the most realistic thing that I came across, the closest that I got to an actual bug out bag was when I was living in a place where there was a risk of seismic activity that can be earthquakes. So what we had was a briefcase by the side of our door with everything important to us, with all the documents. There were some hand crank charges for cell phones, because if there's a huge earthquake, the power grid is going to go down. And some other essentials. So that's the closest thing to a bug out pack that I got. But some other generic things, self-defense items, first aid kit. Well, you should, of course, get to know how to use that first aid kit. Maybe, depending on what your general plans are in this bugging out, where are you going, what are you doing? That's the main thing about bugging out. Not just having a bag full of shit. It's not worth at all, especially if you're carrying too many things. That's gonna slow you down. You have to keep it as light as possible. Hygiene kits, maybe a change of clothes, food and water. I'm not sure. It's very heavy. It really depends on what you're trying to do. Money, of course. Always having money on you somewhere, on your EDC kit, on your bug out kit. That's very much valuable. Anyway, you really should think about what you realistically will need and fit your kit to your own demands.
Yeah, I guess it would also depend on what type of scenario you're in, right? Because if it's just something that you know is going to only last a couple of days, that's going to be a different, you're going to be preparing differently for that than if something happens that's going to last months, right?
Yeah.
Do you have separate
So,
plans in place for that kind of thing?
well, I have my own plans for I only have plans for short and mid-term. I don't have plans long term, like months or even years. I don't think that's quite realistic, but I'm sure that with what I have is enough to get me going until I can trace out a plan should anything start happening like right now. But until then, I can figure something out. I can learn and research about things. I have decent connections. I don't have like a huge community. I don't have a huge family, but what I have is I'm confident that it can get me going.
I remember hearing listening to a prepper talk about things that he thought was important to have, and he mentioned a whole lot of lighters, like to carry a bunch of lighters. And I thought to myself, why would somebody want to have the
I mean,
extra weight? Pardon?
you really need it? Depends. If you're reliant on lighters to make fires, you can have as many lighters as you want. You're gonna need a lot of space to store it, and well, even if you had, I don't
Well,
know, a whole lot of lighters, it's still a limited supply. You should have a more diverse way of making fire, maybe having a couple of striking rods, learning how to use it, how to build a fire.
yeah, he was mentioning it not just for building a fire, but also because of having more than just one or a handful, that he would be able
Yeah,
to now
having a
trade with
handful is
other people.
definitely great.
That
Also
way
depends
he'd be,
on what I said, knowing how long really you want to plan out. So you could think about that, but try to diverse things, learn the skill of making fire. Maybe even hell without a lighter at all. That's a takes it's really not easy, but it's a very, very valuable skill. I
yeah, I would
personally,
agree.
I don't know that skill. I kind of have to because I love camping. I should try it out sometime.
Okay, so first Big Dipper concept and then random guy. They had questions for, oh, Looks like he just disconnected. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
I just wanted to get a rebuttal and say, you don't have, that in the way of good communal provisions or ties. But I mean, you do have this space, which, I feel like the profoundness of the utility that you can derive from a place like this is something, mind you, the infrastructure that supports it is up and about.
Okay, great. Thank you. BlackFeathers, I was curious. I've gone down this path a bit myself. And one of the things that I found that at least played out in my own mind a couple of times, and of course, even with the so-called Rona issues last year, it became rather interesting how close I was to doing a few things. And specifically, one of the biggest parts is, and I didn't hear everything because, as they were mentioning, you were breaking up some, but it's, in my estimation, before we ever bug out, you should be very much considering bugging in, because this is where all the stuff is. And unless, well, at least from like where I'm at in California, it's been mentioned several times in the so-called prepper community, especially people in the more rural areas that outside of the city areas have mentioned, especially going north towards farming land, that the people up there aren't even going to come close to allowing a bunch of people from down south to move up and just take over their land and move in and ravage land and do all that.
Exactly. As I said, most people talking about bugging out. Well, I'm sorry, I may be wrong, but what I've seen so far, they don't talk as much about the plan, about how realistic it is, where they are going. They talk bug out bag, bug out supplies. It's not gonna be worth anything if you don't know what the hell you're doing. You're gonna be out in the wild with a huge load on your back or in your vehicle, ready to be, I don't know, ambushed, taken out of you. It's gonna slow you down. Don't. You have to have a community. You have to have a place, where all your stuff is, and maybe the worst case scenario, defend it. And if you can't, okay, then maybe if you really have a solid plan, leave.
Right. Well, what I looked at, and this is part of the way I approached it, because just like with what did play out at the very beginning of the whole Rona thing in the beginning of 2020, and I literally almost busted out some of the gear that I'm about to talk about. And I've done some of what you've talked about already, kind of scout the area out, make sure of what's around you, be very certain of your surrounding environment. Well, my big thing is I figured out that if this shit does happen, things hit the fan, that one of the most important things that you could possibly have is the ability to breach buildings. And I'm not talking necessarily break in through the, break doors down and stuff. If you have to break the doors down, fine. But I'm actually talking about, I went so far as I started learning how to do my best to master lock picking.
That's kind of, it's a legally gray area, but yes, it's a very, very valuable tool. I'm a little more blunt. I don't have the finesse for lock picking. The kits are kind of expensive for what I have accessible, but I do have a fucking crowbar.
Well, that's the next thing. I got the crowbar. The one thing I haven't got yet, and I just haven't found a decent one, and that's a decent sized bolt cutter. But I've actually gone so far as I've got the pry bar. I've got a couple of different pry bars. I do want to get a good sized bolt cutter. Like I said, I just haven't found a size that will fit with my gear, because I'm looking at stuff that I can put with a specific backpack, because if I'm doing this, I'm doing it under the situation where I'm going out and I'm having to scavenge for supplies. And
yeah, that's under the category of improvisation and of skills that you may need. One of the skills is also about self-defense. Don't learn how to shoot a gun. Anyone can do that. Kids can do that. Literally anybody. Try airsoft maybe, paintball. It's not terribly realistic. The best would be military training, but not everyone can get that. But
Right.
try having a handful of matches on a handful airsoft matches and paintball rounds and get to understand how it works.
Right. Well, now I've even gone so far. I got some high tensile strength rope. It's not actual climbing rope, but it's rated right there at 1,500 tensile strength pounds. I also got a grappling hook so that if I can't get in through whatever buildings, or I have to go over walls or whatever, on the flip side, and of course, this is one of the things that I've always believed in. Bullets are great. Yeah, having a gun, learning how to shoot, but blades are forever. Bullets are badass, but blades rule the world. So in that instance, one of my skills that I've planned on, and I haven't totally achieved it yet, but to get good at forging. I have a lot of different skills. I know how to do wiring. I know how to do plumbing. I know how to build houses. I got a lot of different skills. But in this instance, having a few other skills, like you were mentioning, just a few different things could be extremely beneficial. Extremely beneficial.
Yeah, again,
because you can use it
skills
as
are your
free.
most valuable asset. Skills cannot be taken away from you, and if you have
Absolutely.
skills, you're going to be extremely valuable to people, whatever thing goes down. So
Exactly.
if you
Exactly.
don't even need to have any supplies if you are extremely resourceful, because if there is a community and you are an extremely valuable member, they will provide for you because they need you. They need those
Right.
skills. You need to
Right.
be able to rebuild, to grow food, to whatever you have that they need. Because supplies can be taken away, they can be used up. It's not doesn't last forever.
Right. And of course, on the flip side, and this is where I look at it from one extreme to the other. And kind of like the conversation we were sparking up last night or the night before, whenever it was, about, having armament, or like you were just mentioning, guns. Well, in my estimation, a lot of people get crazy. They build these armories practically, where they got all these different guns and everything.
How
That's
many
all
hands
great.
you have? Two.
Right. Well, that's kind of it. And it comes down to, at least for myself, the way I've done it, I've set up with enough of the right stuff to where essentially myself and the family, everybody has at least one of something,
Yeah.
And I've got enough ammunition to where I don't know that there's ever really such a thing as enough, but in my estimation, with the amount that we do have, if we can't stop the threat with what we've got, we're not going to stop it. That's kind of where I'm at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, again, it's a last resort. Try to avoid conflict at all costs. I cannot have guns here. I'd love to. I
That sucks, asshole, too, brother.
like
I feel for you. I
rules. I
feel
like
for you.
But I do have alternatives. There are many alternatives that you can have, which are not as efficient, but they have some upsides that guns don't have, and they last for longer. Some don't require ammunition. They vary on degrees of effectiveness, but there are alternatives.
How can you have anything archery, like bows and arrows or crossbow?
Repeating crossbows are quite good. Bows are kind of unwieldy. They're big, clunky. It takes a lot of skill to use.
Well, they are a little
So
on
I
the
don't know,
clunky side, but the
crossbows,
skill's not that much.
slingshots, whatever. On the ranged stuff, also there's also melee, of course, with varying degrees of utility.
Thank you, Random Guy, for your questions. I'm going to bring up Big Dipper Concept. He has a question as well. And for whatever reason, it's giving me problems doing that. Those are great questions, by the way.
Oh, this podcast is undergoing many
Yeah.
technical
Yeah,
difficulties.
it takes me
It's
like
kind of fitting for the topic.
yeah, technology it fails you when you most need it, right? Yeah, it takes me like 10 seconds to get the invite to participate. But I was just gonna say along foraging lines, mushrooms in particular, very nutritious. You oftentimes really don't need to worry about touching them. It's just ingestion. Never ingest anything you're not absolutely certain you know what it is, because the repercussions will be quite dire and oftentimes untreatable. But that's like the one pretty consistently good side effect of all these torrential downpours is that they're sporing like crazy. So, things that are quite easy to identify, trumpets, chanterelles, uh, lobsters, etc. A good staple for like a stew, just, make sure you saute all of them initially. Heck, it's almost like a shellfish substitute with all these torrential rains. The flesh gets, yeah, and to the extent you can't really get all the grit off, it's very much akin to like a shellfish substitute.
That is terrific advice, but also it's contextual. Not everyone has access to that. I'm lucky because my city isn't too big nor too small. We're close to the rural areas. We have water. We have so in my scenario, I got a lot covered. I'm quite lucky, but not everyone has that same luck. So if you live to forest areas or areas where these stuffs grow, where you can realistically forage, definitely learn that. If you don't, look for alternatives. Be proactive as to trace out a route, a plan to do whatever. As I said, prepping, when it comes down to it, to the core of the whole thing, it's one word: proactiveness. Learn what that means and learn how to apply that to your life and to your context.
Thank you, Big Dipper, for your contribution there. It's very helpful as well. So, BlackFeathers, does anybody else have any questions? BlackFeathers, do you have anything else to add as a takeaway for the audience?
Well, my last statement, my last thing that I talked was pretty much it. It was, what the hell is something going on up there? Anyway,
Yeah, random.
yes, that's basically it. It's rather simple. It's kind of bad to say this after an hour of podcast.
Random guy does want to have a question here.
Actually, it was a little bit of a comment, and it was just something that kind of going along with this whole thing, what BlackFeathers was just talking about. And this will give an idea of how much I think that we might be really close to what BlackFeathers is talking about, and having a serious shit hit the fan scenario go even further than what we were talking about with last year. I just got word that one of my powerlifting friends, buddy of mine for many, many years, he got the vax and he died Friday. And there's a lot of people dying from this vax that I'm hearing. And this, I think, could actually be a bit more of that trigger that BlackFeathers is talking about that gets into that shit hit the fan even more so. So and this guy is in not great shape, but not in bad shape. He was a little overweight, but he was a power lifter. So that was kind of the norm for that is how power lifters are. But in a general sense, this guy was strong as an ox. He was in basically generally overall good health.
Sorry
Got the
for
vax,
loss.
all of a sudden got sick, and now he's gone. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I miss this guy. This guy was actually responsible for getting me deep into powerlifting. This was the guy that originally hired me to be staff at a powerlifting meet when I didn't really know powerlifting, and he was the whole spark to my entire powerlifting career. I'm crushed right now, guys. I'm absolutely crushed, and it just pisses me off. It just pisses me off that people are getting vaxxed and dying, and there's no big hoopla. There's no freaking mainstream media rage about this shit. It just, I'm sorry. I'll just shut up. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll just shut up now because I'll just rant and rave if I go on.
Sorry to hear
Thank
that.
you, brother.
I won't make a comment on the vaccine, but as a closing statement, I bring this out because I want to do the podcast. Could have been done better, but anyway, it's a time of great instability. Let's learn from this. It shows how unprepared we are, how dire things can become really quickly. The modern times has given us a sense of comfort, of security, but it's all illusory. Things can go away fast. Bad things can happen very fast. So be mindful of that. Be vigilant. Know what's going on. Know what's coming. And well, it's kind of hard right now because there's so much shit going down. It has been a great time for learning. Let's take these troubled times as a lesson, and let's be more proactive. Should the whole world and the governments have been proactive enough, things wouldn't be as bad as it is right now. This prepping notion, this proactiveness thing, isn't just for people, it's for everything. Can apply it to everything. Companies, institutions, groups, governments, whatever. Proactiveness is what got us surviving. It's what got us here. And we should never forfeit this and become conformed to whatever we have, because things are unstable even when it may not seem as it is. As an example, the Fukushima nuclear station, it was one of the most safe power plants ever built. They were built to withstand earthquakes and to withstand crazy tsunamis, but it was not built to sustain both at the same time. What happened? But it was very unlikely, but both of the disasters happened at the same time, and shit went down the drain. So just as an allusion to this concept, you can't quite prepare for everything, but you should at least try and give great consideration, and at the worst case scenario, be able to react, not panic, and to improvise and adapt to the situation at hand. These are the most valuable things that you can have.
Excellent points. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. Great. Thank you, BlackFeathers. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for your questions. Shogun, are you able to speak right now? Is your mic working? No. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you for being a part of the roundtable.